Lo voy a presentar en inglés. So let's welcome Jeffrey Lazarus, Professor of Global Health at CUNY Graduate School of Public Health in New York, and the Head of Public Health Liver and Group IS Global, and Associate Professor of University of Barcelona, and Chair of Healthy Livers, Healthy Lives Initiative. He's going to talk to us about the results of multi-country viral hepatitis community screening, vaccination, and care program. Thank you, Professor, for being here with us, and thank you for your time. I know it's quite early in New York, right?
Thank you. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation. Yes, I just left Europe for New York after the Congress of the European Association for the Study of the Liver. So it's a bit early, but I'm also a bit jet lagged. So I've been up for a couple of hours. So let me share my slides and tell you a little bit about this project that we call VH, viral hepatitis. Savak, that took place in 3 countries across Europe and has just come to a close here a few weeks ago.
Yes, it's okay.
Great, then I will continue, and if there's any issue with the connection, just let me know. One of the most pressing issues with viral hepatitis, both hepatitis B and hepatitis C, is to simplify diagnosis and the care pathways. In this case, I'll be focusing on hepatitis B primarily and migrant populations in the European Union. So migrants and refugees are disproportionately affected by hepatitis B. And here you see a map of, well, the Mediterranean and the countries surrounding it, and you see, where the migrants are arriving from and how they're arriving. In this case, into Spain, both by sea and by land, and they might be arriving from other EU countries, but they're coming from other parts of the world, as I'll show in a minute. And we see a much higher prevalence of either hepatitis B or hepatitis C, depending on the migrant population, which is why as I'll explain, we tailored our intervention. So in a Spanish study, it was shown that undocumented migrants made less use of health services than those in the low and very low socioeconomic groups. So you can see here at the bottom, undocumented migrants made much lower use of mental health services, were prescribed drugs less, made less use of emergency services, which is interesting because at the EASL Congress, there was a presentation about how in Greater London, they were able to identify 9,000 people with hepatitis B in the emergency rooms, but still many people won't reach the emergency room. So we have to think of what kinds of care pathways, interventions, and settings we can reach different migrant groups in. Again, this is focusing on undocumented migrants. We also primarily saw those who were documented in our EU program. And here you see undocumented migrants attending primary care, much less for obvious reasons. So we have to figure out ways to reach that population. A systematic review presented a range of barriers that migrants face. There's all sorts of logistical barriers, knowledge and skill sets, health literacy challenges, linguistic barriers. We saw people among the group of people we saw, they spoke more than 100 native languages. So speaking Spanish, this was also a program in Greece and Italy, but Greek, Italian, Catalan, and English was just not enough. So we worked with peer navigators who were able to help us engage those with cultural and linguistic barriers, but really all of these kinds of issues that I'm showing you there. Now, there is good guidance, both global guidance from the World Health Organization on hepatitis B and C testing, but also here in the European Union, there's epidemiological assessments and studies. Here you see one on the right from the European Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. But still, I feel that we're failing in all of the EU countries in reaching migrants with the services that they need, which is why we launched Savak, which is a community-based strategy. It grew out of a pilot project I'll present briefly called HPV Comme Ça Va. And here you see folks from my team, Dr. Camila Piquio on the right, Nurse Emma standing on the right, and here we're inside a mosque just outside of the center of Barcelona, as we engaged with migrants during their religious ceremonies in collaborations with imams, pastors, and ministers who would inform the population of why it's important to get tested, and then we would come and set up shop. So if you look closely at the picture in the foreground, you'll see a yellow and red box. That's the sharps box, but behind Dr. Camila is a whole range of tools and materials that we brought with us, from dried blood spots to rapid detection tests, drying racks, and so on. This was an EU co-funded project, as mentioned, in Italy, Greece, and Spain, but coordinated out of my office at Barcelona Institute for Global Health, IS Global, and the idea was to scale up community-based models to increase hepatitis B and C testing, and particularly hepatitis B vaccination and linkage to care among migrants and refugees of any type, not just undocumented migrants, in those three countries, and set an example for what can be done in other parts of the world. So it was or other parts of the EU at least. It was a prospective cohort study, originally set to end in November 2024, and ultimately ended just a couple of weeks ago, a day we'll never forget, because as we were presenting the findings with the authorities, all of the power went out across Spain. On the right, you see the model of care, working with NGOs, the religious centers. We receive informed consent. We do some epidemiological questionnaires. We do a rapid detection test, and in 15 to 30 minutes, we have a first indication if they have hepatitis B or C. We then, as you see on the left in Catalonia, collect a whole blood sample on a plasma separation card, which is like a Whatman card if you're familiar with dried blood testing, but it's more stable. So for around 40 days, at temperatures as high as 40 degrees, we can have this thing in a little plastic bag in the office, in a drawer in a safe place, and eventually get it to the lab. If the individual then proves to be negative and isn't vaccinated, we'll provide a first dose of hepatitis B vaccine in the community, something that was quite challenging with the authorities, who felt that we shouldn't be allowed to take the vaccines from the hospital into the community. We explained that the community wasn't going to go to the hospital, and eventually we were able to vaccinate there. And in Madrid, Athens, and Milan, they had a referral for follow-up for the second-line confirmatory test, and anyone positive was then linked through expedited referral services to secondary care in the university hospitals. In our case, the Hospital Clínic, we're connected in Barcelona, and also the Vall d'Hebron Hospital in Barcelona, and ultimately we expanded to two other hospitals. And so it's been an amazing collaboration with hepatologists and some ID doctors in order to make sure the migrants can get to the hospital and be seen very quickly when they get there. These numbers from 1854 are now over 2,000 when we closed the project. Most were male among the participants. Most were quite young. Around half had arrived to the EU in the last 5 years, really, and were primarily from sub-Saharan Africa and from Eastern Europe in our study. That doesn't mean that those are the main migrant populations. And obviously, we were working with those that come from medium or high prevalence populations, not people like me who originally come from the US, or those coming from other parts of the EU, at least in this project. And you'll see the prevalence, what overall was for hepatitis B surface antigen, 3.6%, for hepatitis C antibody, 3.1%. And if you see the orange line under hepatitis B, we were focusing on populations with a high prevalence of hepatitis B in their home country, and we found twice as many people with hepatitis B there. 6% of those we tested had hepatitis B, and a much smaller percentage had hepatitis C, whereas in Greece, for example, it was a very different situation. Here you see the maps of the countries of birth, and this is really just to illustrate that participants came from all over the world, and those who had hepatitis B and C came also from all over the world. And we'll be publishing the details of that and some further analysis soon. In our hepatitis B Comme Ça Va program, which was a smaller pilot project that we ran from 2020 to 2022 in the greater Barcelona area, you see that for those with hepatitis B, most were linked to care. And you can see here that they were linked to care in with a median of about 15 days. So we were able to get them linked to care very quickly from the community. Actually, if they had been diagnosed in primary care, the median was around 86 days. So again, we had expedited referral services, and primary care does not. We were able to get people into care much faster than the regular health system. The other side of the coin is really that although I think we're doing a good job in linking to care, long-term retainment and engagement is one of our big challenges. So here you see on the left the numbers that were diagnosed in Catalonia. So this was just a sub-study, but I'll draw your attention really to the retention in the continuum of care or care cascade among hepatitis B surface antigen positive participants. And you'll see about 5 columns over the drop-off after the second specialist visit falls greatly. So we were able to get people into care and engage with them from the community. We would talk to them, their peer navigators would work with them for their second specialist visit, and then it was much more challenging for long-term care. We need to do a better job of explaining why they need to continue with their visits and what it means for their health. They need to understand about treatment flares and the importance of monitoring treatment if they've been put on treatment. So here you see that big drop-off, although this is a small N. So some of the takeaway messages from this kind of community-based viral hepatitis testing program are that we successfully screened at-risk and refugee populations across Europe and reported high prevalence compared with the general population. So that was really sort of our first endpoint or our first hypothesis was, can we do this? Can we reach migrant and refugee populations? It wasn't easy. It meant setting up relationships with the communities, engaging peer navigators, and then ultimately setting up the services, and in our case, carrying everything with us each weekend when we tested in the community. So these kinds of decentralized, community-based interventions can help reduce inequities. We know there's much more viral hepatitis in these populations, and they're less likely to access formal health system services. So we need to bring the services to them. And although I'm not presenting it now, we have done the first cost effectiveness analysis and shown that it's also cost effective to test in the community, even though it is very resource intensive. Strong and coordinated referral processes contribute to timely linkage to care. They reduce loss to follow-up at the first step along the care cascade. And long-term retainment, though, as I mentioned, is one of our big challenges for people living with hepatitis B. One of the highlights for me at the EASL Congress was discussions around a functional cure that's being developed. So we really need to keep people in care in the hopes that in a few years a functional cure is approved and they're able to access it, not to mention keep them in care just for their own health. I didn't really mention much about IS Global, but you'll see in the orange box at the bottom, those are the projects that my team, the Public Health Liver Group at IS Global, runs. We run clinical trials looking at, for example, metformin among people with pre-diabetes and living with HIV in sub-Saharan Africa. We're part of Liver AIM, which you see on the bottom right. It says AIM Liver. That's a very large 24 million EU funded project looking at new serum biomarkers to detect liver disease. And in the upper right, you see the hepatitis C Free Baleares. This was a hepatitis C program we led to eliminate hepatitis C across the Balearic Islands. And I think Dr. Romero Gomez spoke, so he might have mentioned on the bottom right the CARPA project where it says care pathway. And this is bringing FibroScans and the ELF test, the enhanced liver function test, into primary care to see if we can also start diagnosing in primary care. So while my group was working in the field, we're also working in primary care with new tools and looking at the feasibility and the cost effectiveness of their use. And I'll end just with a little question. If we have time for questions and answers, we can discuss this. But the the polling question here is people diagnosed with viral hepatitis B can easily access care and appropriate treatment in my country. And I know that you come from various countries, so if we have time, it would be great to hear what you think about that. So with that, I'll bring the presentation to a close, and Chair, if there's any time for question and answer, I'm happy to be a part of that.
Thanks a lot, Jeffrey, Professor. According to your expert opinion, which countries are leading the way of implementing effective policies regarding of the elimination of yeah, it was good. Yeah. Oh, we can hear you now. No, you're mute.
Mejor si se
Okay.
suben a hablar.
Yeah, are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
You should be able to hear me now, right?
Yes. Okay. Sí, sí. Well, again, I'll ask again. My name is
I
Gerardo.
heard the question.
And
So
yeah.
you asked which countries are really leading the way in terms of viral hepatitis elimination.
Yes,
And
and for other countries, what can we learn about them?
yeah, so some of the countries that have been doing best, traditionally have been Australia, the country of Georgia in the Caucasus, Iceland to some extent, also Spain. And what we really learned about them, and parts of Scotland, I would add as well, is that they have a strategy, and a strategy that's been approved by the government. In the case of Australia for hepatitis C, they were able to negotiate good prices for DAAs to treat and cure, obtain a sustained virologic response for hepatitis C. Also in Iceland, I realize it's a small country, but they had strong government support. So I think having government support is key. We have this bottom-up approach from all of us with our projects and at our hospitals and clinics, but when we get the top-down approach from governments, we move a lot faster. So I think a strategy and an action plan is key. I know there's one in Andalusia that I contributed to. There's one in Catalonia. There's one across Spain, and that's made one of the big differences. Right. Anyone else have any questions or comments?
Hi, can you hear me?
I hear you. Thank you.
Okay. I was wondering, in terms of the intercultural mediators in the study, how were they selected and trained, and did they have a huge impact in the screenings? Thank you.
They had a huge impact. Without them, this would have been completely impossible, really. They opened the door to the community. They're with us giving talks at the beginning of each session, introducing us to them and really helping the community understand what we want to do from a community that sometimes may fear the authorities, including the health system. They were trained by us, but also by a group we collaborate. It's called Salud Culturas in Madrid, as well as by a group of colleagues who work with one of the CAPs, the Centros de Atención Primaria, in Barcelona. So they're given that kind of training more around viral hepatitis because they're already experienced, usually as mediators. A couple of them came from my students in the master's course at IS Global, and some came through the organizations, like the organization of Ghanaian people or Senegalese people in Spain or in Catalonia who we engaged with, and they recommended people. And then we actually paid them a small honorarium for their work, and I think it's important to remunerate those who are going to do the work with us in the field.
Can you hear me? Perfect. My name is Leonardo. I'm also part of the Europubhealth Master's students. So my question is, in a context where viral hepatitis remains a silent epidemic like in developing countries, how can we better leverage public health data and digital innovation to drive more effective policies, especially in countries with fragmented health systems?
Yeah, well, it is a big challenge particularly in low-income countries, where they have so many competing priorities. So I think monitoring and evaluation has been really important, and that's why WHO plays an important role. WHO, in terms of budget and staff, is relatively small. I worked there 11 years. We don't do a lot of implementation, but in terms of collecting data, this helps put the pressure on governments to collect the data in the first place. And then there are league tables, and it shows how well they're doing. So why are they doing better or worse than their neighbors? So I think collaborating, let's say with the particular WHO regional office is important. And then I think it's linking up. You asked about digital tools. It's linking up to ongoing services. So if there are better diabetes services or HIV services, it's linking up with those services. So we have a paper out last year in the Lancet on integrating care, where we looked at bringing diabetes and hypertension services into HIV services in Tanzania and Uganda. It was a cluster randomized controlled trial, but I think that's one of the ways forward. As HIV services are doing well and are well funded, it's what can we do for in those services? Not everyone had HIV, or for those populations. The other trial I mentioned was testing metformin among people living with HIV and pre-diabetes to see if it will stop progression. So where there's better funded services, it's looking at how we can collaborate. And I think digital tools, I mean, it is the future, but in some ways we've seen that future in low-income countries get ahead of us in high-income countries, because where doctors are far away, we've seen radio services 20, 30 years ago provide HIV information where there were no health services to reach those populations. So I think we need to get better, much better at harnessing those services, as well as self-tests. So now we have a hepatitis C pre-qualified by WHO. It's published, made by OraSure. So we have a hepatitis C swab where people can test themselves. So we need to have services that will support the population, but also tools that they can use themselves.
Thank you, Professor Jeffrey. Very quickly, you had expressed before the challenges in the continuation of care, and we're talking about particular population, undocumented, very mobile. And we heard even before in another study here in Andalusia, the challenges of keeping the people in the program. Is there any good practice you want to share with us, how we can keep the people in the system if they diagnose them, for example, in Lampedusa, and the people keep moving? Thank you.
Well, it also depends where they move, because as you know, in Spain, you have a decentralized healthcare system. So even for Spanish people, changing autonomous community can be quite challenging. One thing that was exceptional, I think, in Catalonia was that for those who are undocumented, we were able to provide them with a health card for 1 year. So together with the Red Cross and the authorities at the Generalitat, they allowed us to provide the card that would give them all health care. So actually our program became a beacon for people who wanted to know if they had hepatitis B, but also were able to get into the system. No judging, no questions about why and how they got to Barcelona or the greater Barcelona area. But we focused on their health issues. At the same time, Madrid was making it very difficult for migrants, undocumented in particular, to get their HIV treatment. So I think if we want to focus on people's health, we need to make them feel comfortable with those services. But if they're moving between EU countries, it's very challenging, and often we can explain, but we've had people we've reached with really nothing, just a knapsack. So I don't expect them to know if they had their second dose of the hepatitis B vaccine or not. So that is a challenge. And I guess my last comment is, working with the community and stressing the importance of the community supporting them. So when we're not there, the community is also talking about health issues. And it's been remarkable to see, again, reverends, pastors, imams talking about the importance of health to their community and working together as a community.
Thank you. That's very useful. Thank you very much.
I have a question. Considering that many viral hepatitis cases remain diagnosed, what do you see as the key steps to integrate screening and treatment into primary care without overburdening healthcare professionals?
Yeah, it's one of the big questions because primary care, has enough to do. So of course there's risk screening, so there can be questions about where people are from or their lifestyle habits, but we know that that can also be very stigmatizing. I think alert systems for viral hepatitis can work in primary care, posters and information materials. But I think the study showed that in the Barcelona area, you would test 1,000 people before you found one positive. So we need to get much better at engaging with the communities that we know are higher risk. I think primary care should have the offer and engage on biohepatitis testing, but I think the answer lies in addiction centers, community centers, and really outside the formal health system. And we've seen remarkable things. We worked with 14 addiction centers across the Balearic Islands, so in Mallorca, Menorca, Ibiza, even Formentera, and we were able to test thousands of people and find a very high prevalence, 10% by working with the addiction centers. It takes more effort, but we need to go to where the virus is and not hope that those people show up and actually get tested in primary care.
Thank you, Professor Jeffrey.
Hello, and thank you for your presentation. My name is Louis. I'm a pharmacist from France, and I was wondering, since my country is in the middle of the immigration in Europe between Spain, Italy, and Great Britain, I was wondering if you knew what my country was doing in the hepatitis world to fight against all of this.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on what's going on in France, but I know that your harm reduction services are starting to engage on viral hepatitis. I know that community groups are very active, but I'm not so sure with regards to migrants, what's happening. I know Italy has taken a lot of action at the borders where migrants are arriving from sub-Saharan Africa with testing programs. I'm not sure if that's the case in France as well.
Okay. Do you wish France was more proactive with you working
When we
together
look,
in Italy?
yeah, I mean, when we look at sort of global data or EU data, France never really sticks out to me as a country that's doing particularly good. Not that they're doing particularly bad, but I haven't seen France as an example. Things may have changed in the past few years, but I guess before the COVID pandemic, so already 5 years ago, France was never really an example country. They weren't one of the first to have a national plan to address viral hepatitis. They do have one of the great virologists in the world, and they've done amazing work on the development and use and testing of DAAs with people like, Dr. Jean-Michel Pavlovsky in Paris. But I haven't seen France really setting an example, whereas, for example, in Spain, they declared universal access to DAAs for hepatitis C very early on and treated over 150,000 very quickly. So for many years, Spain was the country that had most treated and cured people living with hepatitis C.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Professor. I think this is oral or all questions have been made. Thanks a lot for your voice.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and have a good rest of your day. Bye for now.
The same for you.